Hello and welcome to a new video here on the channel. Now, when diecast manufacturers like Harper Wings fail us and just don't deliver the models we want to have, well, we have to do them ourselves, make custom models. Now, in a way, I have a basic understanding of how to do this, but the thought of having to make it myself, well, still scares me. Luckily, I've brought someone with me today, Tim, who you also might know as HDI International Airport, and he has been making loads of customs over the years and has agreed to show us the basic skills you need to know how to make custom models. Now, in a recent video, he has already showed you how to remove, well, printed details on an aircraft model to get an albino model, which is the basis for pretty much all custom models. If you haven't seen that video yet, do check it out. I highly recommend you to do so. Because today, what we will focus on is how to apply decals. Let's be clear here, we haven't reinvented the wheel, and the techniques shown in the video are not the only way to do things, but will hopefully give you as a beginner a starting point from where you can make your own experience, because at the end of the day, nothing beats experience. So what do we need when we want to create our own custom model? A scissor, cutter knife or scalpel will be needed. Some glue, some nail varnish remover, a plain model, decals, Q-tips, tweezers and tape can also be useful, and some lukewarm water. Now, firstly, we will be cutting out the decals. The decals are basically prints that have been added to special decal paper. There are many variants here and many that offer these kind of prints, for example Malefiska or We1, but just try out various ones and find the ones that you prefer. It is important here to be cutting fairly precisely. Now, obviously the scissor we have here is fairly large, so a smaller one is definitely recommended. One thing you need to be taking into account here is when you are cutting these decals, well, which parts are they and where will they be placed? Sometimes it's important to cut right up to the corner, sometimes it's good to leave a little bit of space. Like for example here with the cabin windows. A little bit of an edge is quite good, but parts that are meeting up together, well, here you need to be cutting very precisely. We'll show you in the video so you understand exactly what I mean by this. Here a little tip when cutting out the decals. You might end up with various pieces. Now, in order to make sure that you don't forget which piece belongs to which part of the aircraft, it might be advisable to take a picture of the decal before you start cutting it, just so you are sure to always have a reference picture to which you can revert to. And speaking of reference pictures, make sure you have loads of them from the actual aircraft in real life, so you can also there always check the placements of various details on the aircraft. Alright, on to the next step, and that is of course removing all the printed details of the donor model that we don't need anymore. Now, if you want to see more in detail how to do that, we have already done a tutorial on that, so do check that out. I highly recommend you to do that. But when we in the last tutorial were removing only specific details, here we are removing almost all printed details on the donor model. So this means we have large surfaces that just need to be cleaned up. And for that we have one piece of advice. By cutting into the tip of the Q-tip, you are adding more surface to the Q-tip, so it soaks up more of that nail varnish remover, which can speed up the process of removing the printed details we don't need anymore. But also here, be careful, because there might be some details that are worth saving. In our case, for example, we are saving the cockpit windows, so we don't have to add them as decals, as the ones we have on the model work perfectly fine for the aircraft we want to create. And this leads us to our next piece of advice, and that is choose your donor model wisely. Now, you might be tempted to go for an old Harper model because those models tend to be cheaper, but it is actually advisable to go for newer releases. The reason for that is simply they are much easier to be disassembled, which in most cases when making custom models is a necessary step along the way. This is of course a risky process, as you always have the risk of actually breaking your model during that, but it is, as I say, necessary. Newer Harper models, however, are often much easier to be taken apart than older releases. Now, what parts exactly need to be removed will always depend on the custom model you are making. In our case, it was enough to simply remove the wings. And now it is time to apply the decals. For that, as mentioned, we need lukewarm water, and always be sure to check those reference pictures so you know exactly where you have to place which details. You start by adding the decal paper into the water and let it soak for a little while. A few seconds at least, but the exact time will differ from decal paper to decal paper, so again here you will have to make your own experience to see what time frame is the right for you. Make sure that it is nice and wet, but of course not dripping. And then it is time to add the decal to the plain model. Now the good thing is here you have time, and take your time. Now you add the decal here to the aircraft model and then slowly and carefully slide the paper to the side. As you can see, now you have the decal on the plain model, but obviously still not placed perfectly. But as I said, don't worry, you have plenty of time. Now you can move this around with your fingers, with tweezers, with whatever tool you feel comfortable with. There isn't really a right or wrong here. In the end, the goal is simply to place the details correctly, so whatever works for you, well, works. Now, once you've placed the decal to your satisfaction, you might still end up with quite a few air bubbles, but don't worry, we will fix that. To do that, we will take a Q-tip and add some water to it. Now with some gentle pressure, but really do be careful here because the decal can still be moved around, you will slowly move over the surface and thereby removing those air bubbles. Once you are happy with the removal of all of these excess air bubbles, well, it is time for the dry treatment. This means you are now using a dry Q-tip to soak up any remaining water on the surface. And then it is time to let the decal dry on the aircraft model. This can take several hours, so do be patient. Now, remember when I in the beginning of the video talked about sometimes when cutting out the decal paper, cutting right to the edge of a detail and sometimes not? Well, here's why. Now in our case, we're making a model of an enter-air, and the livery has this thick blue line which meets up on the belly. So we need to apply a decal similar on the other side of the model, and this means they are meeting up on the belly, and you don't want the decal paper to be overlapping. So anytime you have decal papers that are meeting up, you want to cut right to the edge of where they have to meet up. Anytime this is not the case, you have a bit of leeway. Now once you have applied all the decals you wanted to add and they have dried up, it is time to reassemble the aircraft. Now this can be a bit tricky, especially if you do it like Herpa, where they basically skip the glue. And that is why we will add a bit of glue. Just 1 or 2 drops should be more than sufficient. And after you have applied the glue and have added the model back together, just give it a few minutes again to dry up properly. Now in our case we would still need to paint the winglets, but as the very final step of your model making, what I do recommend you, and this is to protect the decals you've added, is to add a clear coat. This will seal off the surface so your model is protected and ready to go on your setup. Alright, so these are some basic techniques you can use when applying decals to your custom model. Once again, thanks to Tim, also known as HDI International Airport, for showing us the basic techniques you need to know when you want to make custom models. If you want to see more stuff like this, then feel free to leave a like. If you're new around here, why not hit subscribe? And with that, thanks so much for watching today's video. I'm checking out, and bye.